Thank you for having me here. To have retreat. It gives excellent opportunity for us to a little bit entreat with ourselves. And so I will be talking about the importance of a very attitudinal shift that we need to make by developing compassion in our everyday life, particularly where the areas of our lives, responsibility, duty, tend to burn out more than we are sometimes able to take on. Of course, compassion is an understanding of nature of life, and not necessarily suffering, because suffering seems a bit heavy to most people, because in Buddhism, suffering and life are almost identical. You can't have life without suffering, and you can have life without you can have life without suffering, but you can't have suffering without life. So the choice is yours. So that being the case, we have to be cognizant of the sufferings and its causes and our failure to attend to them. And Buddhism talks about suffering focused on people, suffering focused on reality, and suffering focused on ultimate truth. So most people, perhaps, it's more relevant to deal with life's demanding issues with people that we work with, and often the people that we are within ourselves that we try to work for, work with. And so they usually say that you can only practice genuine compassion to someone who you love. They say you can be compassionate to a neutral person or people you have never met. Immediately, if you see something physical suffering that they are going through, that you could quickly do something without even think about it. It's just natural human instinct to go and help, to relieve them from that immediate suffering. So quite a lot of the temporal physical sufferings that we see in every human, if possible also in other sentient beings, would help, But often some people are quite tuned to practice that even with non-human beings, These days there's a lot of people who campaign the importance of animals protections and their well-being, instead of causing any direct or indirect harm and injury, destruction of their lives. They should instead do no direct or indirect harm to their lives. Even what we eat and what we drink, we should make sure that we do not contribute to the mass destruction of their lives. So it's very appropriate we're having this breakfast here in this restaurant. I think that a lot of the food and things we consume often could be checked whether it's compassionate produce or less compassionate produce. So when we become conscious of the direct and indirect suffering that other living beings go through, and when we can minimize what we do, that actually contributes to those sufferings. So in many ways we are always instinctively compassionate. In Buddhism we say that basic human nature is goodness, good, and nobody has intention to do harm. And we call that Buddha nature. Buddha nature means nature of light or nature of awakening. But often we are not conscious that we have that. We become so carried away by worldly demands that we forget that is in our heart. But often we are out of touch with our heart, we get carried away by materialism, and as a result of that, we're not so able to stay tuned with the good that we have in our intent. And so if you have a good intent, how do you make sure that intent is maintained in our attention? So therefore, meditation and mindfulness in everyday life is important to how to maintain that intent in every activities we do. But when we do not have that power to retain our compassionate attitude towards others, then we straight away feel the aggression from others rather than what really needs to be attended to. So the aggression often sort of stifles our ability to stay tuned, and so even the aggression of others, say when people you work with or work for, often seems like you get the aggression from the boss or friends or customers or whatever, but we don't realize these people's aggression is not intended. They are pressured or stressed by demands of activities, and so because of that, those people who are loving to each other actually experience each other's aggression more, isn't it? So therefore, in Buddhism they say you have to practice firstly compassion to the people you are closest to, because those you love, you want them to be happy, but when they are appearing aggressive, they're not happy. So if they're not happy, then obviously they are suffering. Obviously they're suffering, whether they are physical suffering or emotional suffering, whatever that case might be. So compassion therefore goes to understand the suffering of others, but to know the suffering of others, you have to know the person's well-being or what are being not attended to from your end. What can you do that will make the aggression go down, if possible? Do you have power to de-escalate the aggression? Because that aggression is unconsciously causing them suffering, and now they are unconsciously causing us, try to instigate the same response from us, or worse, if we are not careful. So compassion is in many ways a preventer of our own suffering and a screener of other people's suffering. When you screen the other people's suffering, we could easily copycat. We don't know how toxic those bad attitude can be. So when we are not very conscious of the misery in the other's behavior, and if we know that the intent is maybe not bad, which we don't know, often we think the aggression or behavior is identical to intention. The person has no conscious awareness that that is their intention, or their behavior might be appearing aggressive to others. Now we need to be conscious of that. If we are conscious that they are unconscious, then we are conscious. Because compassion, it has to be a very conscious knowing of the suffering that they are going through, that they themselves are in many ways helpless. So they're basically seeking help, but they don't know how to ask it very politely. So they usually vent that out to the nearest and dearest. And the nearest and dearest thing, they are being angry to you. So because of that, if we are not in that space to think that way, we too become very much offended by what appears to be their behavior, and then we react as another animal instinct, we become very defensive. And because of that, we escalate the problem that they unconsciously created. Now we are also unconsciously created. So when there's two unconscious people, there will be definitely there will be a big collision. So if one of the two is conscious, then at least he or she may be able to help the other person collapsing. See, so compassion is therefore, it's not a kind of a thing you do from temples and church towards the people where they are suffering. It's like every workplace, every home, every situation. Whenever we are seeing somebody really suffering from whatever, whether maybe it's nothing to do with us directly, maybe to do there with career, their health, their family. They might have multitude of stresses that they are not coping with, and they have been bottling up, and therefore they are venting it out in a kind of, unfortunately, in this space and time, which we happen to be exposed to. So we need to be predisposed to understand that sufferings are often created unconsciously, and it can only be remedied consciously. So therefore, that conscious awareness of the physics of the suffering, or the psychology of the suffering, can only then develop a remedy that can relieve the suffering. And that active relieving of suffering with conscious understanding of the causal chains of the suffering, and then that is compassion. And that compassionate is also, firstly, have to be an attitude, this kind of attitude. This kind of internal awareness, we ourselves almost sympathize, almost feel deep pain in our heart, and as if they are your child, as if they're your mother. Maybe. It helps if you know the person who's aggressive is your mother, your loving mother, or your loving daughter, or something like that. Straight away we have a kind of a natural tolerance capacity that are there to be accessed. But we have to have goodness in us to remember kindness of a mother, or goodness that we should show to her in her time of suffering, and knowing that she's not conscious, and she's not doing this deliberately to me. You have to think like this. So she's not deliberately to me. She's not even aware that she's doing this to anybody. And so therefore I have to be careful how not to de-escalate this situation. This is and so I need to be patient, you know. If we are able to do that, and that is called this compassion directed to sentient beings, the person and their immediate suffering. So when you are able to understand sufferings of others, we're not usually in a mood to share other people's suffering. We don't even want our sufferings very much. We don't want to put up with other people's suffering, you know. So that is the compassion means suffer with. You know, word compassion means suffer with. That in Tibetan the word for compassion is nying je. You know, nying means heart, je means the king. You resort to the king in the house of your heart if he is ever at work. Usually, king in the heart is not working very much. You know, he makes all his subject do the job. He himself not doing the real lifting. You know. So when we turn to our heart, we suffer theirs as if my mother. This is my suffering. This is just her suffering is my suffering. The only thing is, I have the understanding what is the cause of our suffering. Where she's not able to tell this because of the severity of the suffering. So when we're able to be ourselves in the same boat as they are of their suffering, then can only we begin to understand their suffering. But when we are becoming a bit of a rescuer, giving orders from the side, we try to put their misery quickly out so that we don't have to suffer. If that kind of compassion is usually very short, very, very short-lived, and often become cause of irritation, cause of our own impatience and outburst. So compassion has to be not only willingness to be on the same boat in which they are drowned by their suffering, and then try to give them a coping strategy so that their situation is a little bit de-escalated by your TLC. Yeah. whether you have to speak to them nicely or just don't interrupt maybe, just look in the eyes with love and kindness and make them know that you are there. So don't worry, you're not going to escalate it. You're not going to, make it worse, because often unconscious people, even though they are loved ones, they do the exactly wrong thing. So compassion is a willingness to suffer with the loved one, with good forbearance, good compassion, and learning to output a very good behavior that is non-threatening to them. So any tenderness, any loving, compassionate, I would say, manner that we could display to them to basically make peace. They said peace is not a thing, well, it could be a piece of bread, but not peace. Peace is the thing you have to do. They say, give peace a chance. So we have to give a peace a chance so that we do not, I would say, become collide with their expressions. We need to almost de-escalate their expressions out of compassion. Almost we become a good transformer, good recycling bin. That we actually not afraid of being the doormat. We are happy to be the doormat. I say this, that people talk about, I'm being doormat. I said, the problem isn't the doormat. The problem is the you who has locked the door. We are the locked door. That's the problem. The longer we are locked the door, then that much longer the doormat suffers. If we are not a locked door, then the doormat is just a useful thing. People just go past, and that's your role is. We should be like a doormat, useful doormat. In Buddhism, we pray, may I be a log, may I be a bench. Where people are exhausted and suffering, and they can really have a rest on your back while you don't complain. So sometimes we are being too egotistically too important. We can't be just be a useful bench. Maybe that's what they need to be. They're looking for someone who understands you and who you can sit on or sit with. They say that because we are often biased with either attachment to someone or our cause or aversion to the person's aggression, we can't develop the equanimity. Equanimity is compassion, because when you have compassion, it empowers you. The alternative of fighting and fleeing is useless. Fleeing will be, you will carry the scar and resentment with you. Even though you avoid the kind of collision there, fleeing makes you do. Fighting will be just even more destructive. Yeah. So compassion is the alternative, and the best alternative, instead of resorting to fighting, which is the reaction, which is opposite of TLC, which is not tender, means very rough, not loving. Verbally, very speaking harsh things, and not caring at all. Exact opposite of TLC. So when you are practicing compassion, you try to avoid the fighting behavior of the person, and also fleeing behavior of the person. Fleeing behavior of the person is usually very quiet. You think you're patient, but deep down you're seething. You're resenting. You really, maybe you're quiet because he's your boss or something, but deep down you hate like anything. So that's really fleeing, basically. We wish you don't have to put up this. There's no willingness to be in the same boat. You couldn't wait to get out of the boat if you're already in it. So there is that kind of wish to flee or leave. Compassion is actually willingness to suffer with the person. You remember, it's to suffer. Word compassion. There's a passion and a com. Com usually means together, The Latin word com means together, So you have to have passion to be with the suffering of the other, because if you're with the suffering of others, you're not stirring it up, you're not escalating it, it will calm down. That is the peace. You're actually making peace with them, and you're not saying harsh words, you're not showing bad body language, you're deep down really, really empathetic to their well-being, and you know this is your mother or your father or your colleague, and they're a very good person, they must have some few problems on top of this situation, so you feel very, very much for them, and you know that you're not going to make a big fuss that they are instigating. When you have that compassion, then what it does is compassion tolerates the sufferings that are at present. Compassion has to tolerate the suffering at present, at hand. It doesn't flee from or fight with. No, it's an indifferent neglect of the suffering, It has to be really much, the king of the heart has to be mobilized. And then almost you could feel that there's a lot of cardiovascular activity happening when you're really developing compassion, because you've got to mobilize the deep down understanding of the suffering and its causes. Now, if you have some understanding of the causes of suffering, usually greed and anger and jealousy and egotistical mind, a lot of discontented mind in other areas of life, then the person becomes very easy to get upset, So it's nothing to do with the issue. That just happened to be the excuse. When you think about that, then you also do not take on. Do not also take too much personally. But therefore, what do? You depersonalize this. Often we do not practice compassion, and therefore we fight or flee because we personalize. Why did you do this to me? Straight away, me. We become so defensive of this me. The compassion is not about me. Compassion is about the other. The other, because as soon as you practice compassion to the other, your own well-being is automatically taken care of. You can see you are becoming peaceful. That's very good. Thank goodness they help you to practice peace. You have peaceful. You think you're a peaceful person, but it's untested. Now today you're tested, and you're shortlisted as a compassion practitioner. You're the only 4 last people who are chosen to practice compassion. But how do you even know that gold is gold? In Buddhism it says that even compassion or whatever virtues you try to practice, you have to test it. And if you test your compassion with a loved one, it's much better, isn't it? And we can't practice tolerance with the loved ones. We can't do that with strangers or difficult people who we have some kind of differences. So therefore, therefore, act of compassion in a kind of interpersonal, direct kind of encounter, where we are able to remain tender, loving, and therefore patient, and not saying words that will escalate the problem. Also, deep down, have no really enmity towards them, but deep empathy, what they may be going through. But deep down, if one resents what they said and outwardly try to control the lips or mouth, it's called passive aggression. It's basically harming oneself more. A lot of people do that in civilized first world. In the first world, most people are very, very well mannered outwardly. They're really educated, but deep down they don't know how much destructive harm they're causing by that kind of repression of negativity. So then their thoughts and feelings, emotion become chemicals, and that can make the physical body feel very, very much consumed from within, exhausted from within. They don't have the kind of capacity to accommodate such attitudinal shifting, intelligent emotion like compassion. You don't have the capacity to accommodate, let alone create them. So therefore, compassion is a conscious practice. Conscious practice, it's awareness practice. And the good thing about that is, not only you are enduring the sufferings, but you are actually making, by not retaliation, but you are making the suffering impermanent. You're actually not just believing things are impermanent, you're actually making the suffering decrease by your skillfulness. Because peacemaking is about not escalating the cause of suffering, isn't it? Now, you can tell the person not to do what they're doing, but some way of telling them might be causing just that. So sometimes just keep quiet and be supportive. By doing that, That's real compassion. Because that compassion really increases your loving kindness towards each other. And then next time similar things happen, this is my turn to practice. Sometimes they practice, And whenever you do practice like that, then you realize, even though you don't have much problem, really, really interpersonally, even if people try to push you wrong button type of thing, you still, as soon as they do, you straight away you register your compassion, and as a best way to defend them and you and the relationship. It's not about who's right and who's wrong, because that's where the fighting and fleeing mentality makes you think who's right and wrong. But here that's not. Both well-being of both has to be saved. If that's saved, then there is no one who's wrong. No one who's wrong. And there's no one who is right either, because they are only relative. They're only relative to each other. So therefore, even if their misery has become an unpleasant thing, it has become the cause of your compassion. Can't be too bad. Can't be too bad. In the factory, you need raw materials. Raw materials. This is raw material. Suffering and life is cause of giving rise to compassion. Only if we consciously, cognitively, and predispose ourselves. Buddhism is correct predisposition how to practice kindness to the otherwise very suffering people. They might have many things they need to the five senses, but they have very little to the sixth sense, which they spiritually neglect of their time. Their time poor to attend to their awareness, consciousness, their light. We call Buddhism Buddha nature, but maybe pan-religiously we call light, the light within us. They don't give time to be with the light within us. And so therefore they always meet with darkness. And they get enshrouded with that, in greed, hatred, competition, resentment, guilt, anger. These things are destructive. They're called destructive emotions in modern psychological terms. In Buddhism, we call them poisons. We call them prisons. We are imprisoned by these very destructive, negative, evil forces. These evil forces are opposite to light. They are darkness. They just keep us in dark places, and they don't make us see things. If we see, we know. If we know, we'll change. But when we don't see, we do not know. So we're like blind, and we don't know how to embrace our things. So we don't want to take this person, but not their problems. The people actually like that. We don't want the people with problems. It's ridiculous. Go to heaven, some 70,000 feet up there. It's very nice up there, except freezing. I'm told nobody lives up there. Heaven isn't there. Heaven isn't up there. Heaven is where ill will is unseated. Any heart where the ill will is not kept. That is heaven, really. That is really joyful. That is cause of love. It empowers you to practice compassion. It makes you practice tender loving care. It empowers you to forgive someone who's straight away. I apologize. I forgive you, my dear. Straight away. Don't say they are wrong, but I forgive you whatever happened. Please don't go on like that. I'm here totally. So when you do the tender loving care, attitudinal shifting behavior outwardly, and because you got to mean it from your intent. When you do that, the power of that will make the other feel that you truly love. How do you know that you are promoting their well-being? You are promoting their well-being when they're in the worst situation. You are actually, instead of falling apart and fighting and blaming and naming or fleeing, running from them, you completely there unconditionally. That is real meditation. Even meditation is not meditation. It's just rehearsal to do this. and so therefore, whether you do breathing meditation, whether you do silent meditation, whether you do chanting meditation, whatever it is trying to raise this awareness. We are capable. of giving rise to this awareness within ourselves, and then being able to practice compassion. And not only we are actually skillfully de-escalating the behavior sufferings, the expression of the behavior of the suffering. If you can sort of calm the outer behaviors down, and you're not adding any fuel to the burning fire, unless the fire is to keep warm. Because sometimes, if you think the fire is for keeping warm, but if you put your hands in it, it will do a bit more than keeping you warm. So people get burned. So people don't realize what we are doing might be the very causes of some of the problem. They are not aware of doing it. Now, if we are unconsciously adding the fuel to their fire, then so we haven't helped them. And so this will make them feel resentful. We lost your temper, you overreacted to me. And people will say, even I said that, but you didn't overreact. I really appreciate it. They will love you more than ever you can ask for. You wouldn't believe how much, once people know that you have been compassionate, you have been patient, where they were really not in good space, they will remember. And then the love is only going to increase. Because that kind of joy, that kind of giving, is you can't extract possibly, That has to come from conscious cultivation of good energies that has to be accumulated over a good degree of time and energy that we consciously have to give rise to, and we need to sort of cultivate them we have to build that as a character, not just an occasional thing. That should be the very motto, philosophy of how I will live. It's not just with whom, but whoever is in that situation, I will practice. First, of course, we have to deal with the near and dear, but then sometimes we are near with some people who are very difficult, not so dear. All of a sudden, people are near with the least dear people. Buddhism we call suffering of having to be with those who you don't want to be. So work with someone you don't like to, or whatever, you don't get on well, let's say. People think that, we get on very well. Yeah, but how long do you get on with it? You get on sometimes, but when things doesn't get on, that's the time you got to really take on something. Take the kind of abrasive edge of theirs so that you can help them to reduce or de-escalate their suffering. Then the elimination of suffering and its causes is not a mercy. It's an interdependent origination. It's just what role you can play to bring the magic out of them. It's not that you can physically remove their suffering by hand. Buddha never said, I'll remove the suffering of people by touching my holy hand. He said, simply empowering them, empowering them to shift like you are doing, trying to shift. In that episode, maybe you did the hard lifting. But any hard lifting you did is actually your advantage, because that will build your own fitness to be like that, right? Because some people who have never practiced kindness or compassion or tolerance before, they're leaving again. Oh, they want to go. Oh, they left again that place. Oh, they're leaving again. They're constantly leaving, and trails of what they call, fleas, and never have to actually confront with themselves, with their own ego. It's their problem. It's not the other person so much. They're only a reflection of what we are not learning to come to terms with our own internal ego. So when we have the humility, or when we love somebody, in front of that person we could display or bring the best out of us only when we're in a good space. And that has to be very conscious, compassionate space. Then we can bring that out, and it is like a medicine. It straight away makes them peaceful. When it makes them peaceful, and it will make you very peaceful, And the consequences of that is that was a useful suffering. You made the suffering very useful. What did you do there? There is no suffering that truly exists. Even as a suffering, it's just a question is what you add to it or subtract from it. You subtract from the suffering all the ill will and misunderstanding out of that, and you add some other things in it, and then that becomes cause of real friendship. You know, where people remember you, you pulling through some goodness from you, and not only the thing just shifted. The moment ago was very, very aggressive, but all of a sudden became cause of forgiveness. I'm sorry to each other. All of a sudden, you know, it became a cause of even reinforcing the friendship that they didn't actually have before. Before the friendship was just skin deep, you know. Now the friendship is actually making the heart shift, you know? because you actually stood in there in front of the other without reacting in a childish way, aggressively, as they might be instigating to you. You become more conscious, you become truly alive. And when the other person is becoming nearly unconscious. So it's good to have a conscious person who's in front of an unconscious person, isn't it? So compassion is about becoming aware. What can I do so that he doesn't fall down? You know, he's saying this already. You know, behaving like this already. You know, it's not personalized this that he's saying this to me, but why is saying this poor thing? Put the thing on him and try to see from a very compassionate and person who can assist him to not fall him down. Then we are not affected negatively by what they're doing. We have been actually alerted by them so that we don't behave and copycat like them. See? Then we have really, of course, understood the human weakness and human suffering, and also human sufferings are not truly existing. They're interdependent. What are you going to do? So you have power to turn the suffering into a cause of deeper friendship, and true loving kindness, true compassion, and that kind of friendship and love is invaluable. You can never ask people to do this for you. You have to do it through hardships. Hardships are the greatest teacher of true growth. In luxury and in kind of pleasure, we learn nothing. We just waste time, I think. People say we are time poor, but in crisis we should be rich in how to make that crisis useful. You know? So some of the greatest leaders in the world grew and became who they are in prison, in the very causes for their belief, and work for the people in spite of all the odds, and not behaving and reacting poorly to make it worse. They stood in there, and that's how they become very strong. So of course every individual has the same capacity, and so that we then, if we have become compassionate person, not only we're talking about like in real time, but we can remember, at that past incident, I haven't been kind to them. I really lost my temper. I really said that, I did that. That really scarred my relationship. Now I must go and apologize. I must give a phone call. You know, I must say sorry. I ignored all of that. I had a breakfast at Chantals this morning. And that was really breaking the fast. And now I'm really going to practice compassion. I'm sorry, I had ignored this all this time, and I must apologize to you, because you should say you tell them what they mean to you, and tell them you love them, and ask them to forgive you. It is really good breakfast. Because otherwise people fasting for nothing. Fasting to look slim and tall or something. they may fall down, you know. Usually I don't get time to talk at breakfast time, so I think this is a good initiative to talk Dharma and make people get in touch with their heart and life and therefore humanity. And then have the tenderness and loving, caring nature of theirs coming out more easily and not hold the negative or opposite of that deep down. Because they're all impermanent. Make them very impermanent, transient, and shouldn't make them so, shouldn't allow them to stay with us. So being able to unbottle those things, after having a good meditation, like you're having meditation, you're reflecting, you're deeply thinking, oh, that could be, I could revisit that situation with these ideas and go and patch up, mend those fences, and be kind to myself and them, instead of being angry about it to them and think, it's they're the one who's wrong or I'm the one who's wrong. This is no use. It's toxic. It's poison. I'm going to sort of put that at an end. With that, instead of putting it off, that you need to make peace with somebody, but not doing anything in the meantime. But actually, immediately saying, I will not delay this. I will straight away make a phone call or have a courtesy visit or whatever to say that we really love them. We really feel sorry, and being able to do that, straight away, as soon as they get a card, they feel so happy. Oh, you send them a sorry card, or thank you card, or forgive me card. I think you should write more forgive me card, okay? We should invent forgive me card. Forgive me card. Forgive me card, Chantals, I think. Special breakfast, forgive me card. And if people start doing that, I'm sure they definitely become conscious. Because all this hurt and pain people have is delayed, neglected, forgiveness. They really want to apologize. They really want to forgive. They really want to make peace with them. They just delay. And then delay karmic debts. Pile up the credit, pile up the interest. Lots of difficulties are no other than past unpurified misdeeds. So compassion is very powerful. So that first one is compassion directed to sentient beings. Then of course, quite a lot of people when they practice compassion and deal with other people's suffering, they themselves have an after effect of that. They really wish they don't have to go through it. You see? So they themselves become some kind of overwhelmed by they have to do this. Even though they're willing to do it, they do that quite often. But deep down they still are a bit overwhelmed and they still have a kind of unintentional resentment. So the second compassion is compassion on the nature of things. The nature of the compassion or the suffering that you did is actually all interdependent. There isn't anything that is truly existing, really. There isn't anything that is there permanently, that is suffering, or there isn't any compassion that you practice that is truly yours. It is all interdependent. So when you're able to do that, then you don't feel that you did all the heavy lifting, they did all the hard things to me, and I gave them a free ride, double attitude. You don't have that. You should, actually, if you really understand the second compassion, wow, they really help you to wake up, Then you become more grateful. You become more grateful that they actually help you to understand these teachings and live truly, freely, and more effectively. So therefore, instead of a resentment, you actually have this some kind of gratitude that through these kind of hardships, you're growing more. So therefore, it isn't a cause of resentment, but it was a lesson you learned. It was a good assignment you did. You got the degree. You really hated writing that assignment. But doing all those assignments, got those degrees, remember that? So like that, yeah. Through the hardships, actually you actually surmount a lot of weaknesses in you, so there's no cause for resentment. That's the nature of really suffering. Suffering teaches us. Without suffering, we are there's no point we are learning anything. You know? All these things people develop, technology, medicine, all these things are to allay suffering, isn't it? Try to make life a little bit easier. So therefore, even your produce, even your technologies is not good unless there's that much demand. Even compassion is not a truly existing virtue if there is no demand for it. Thank goodness there's a lot of demand. The world is suffering and struggling. So our compassion is not a standalone virtue. It doesn't exist. You can't import compassion. You can't import compassion. You have to practice with the suffering. And the compassion isn't in the temple or on the full moon or somewhere. Compassion is really wherever in real time we are dealing with the sentient being people and their difficulties, their behavior, their financial, their physical, their emotional. People have lots of layers of difficulties. And they all come from greed. If they don't have so much greed, if they have contentment, they will not suffer as much. You know? If they have contentment, but they don't know how to have contentment. So you can see why they suffer both. So they're not conscious. Contentment is real, no cause of joy, whereas greed is not. So they want to become so successful or so progressive or so, and that actually sometimes push them more than their lifespan warrants. So when people start living, they start scaling down worldly activities. Still we do what is useful, but not to the extent of burning out ourselves. You know, so have kind of a dignity to slowly reduce one's greed and possessiveness and materialism. And this, of course, will naturally bring our goodness to have a bit more time reach to have practice, conscious contentment. And when there is conscious contentment, then joy comes from that. When people might have a lot, but when they don't have contentment, then they're suffering. So it looks like you or me or others, they are blaming that actually they don't have contentment, and so they don't have joy. So that's the reason why you're compassionate. This person needs to learn the joy of contentment, joy of simplicity. He has so much, but he has so little. You know, he doesn't see anything what he has. And so this is why human beings become slaves to their worldly activity. They are not really master of it. And so life is so short if one doesn't practice contentment. Then there's because of no contentment, there's a lot of greed. Due to greed, there's a lot of worries, anxieties, frustrations, and so then these things are, all these destructive emotions are interdependent. They're also interdependent. So compassion actually empowers the person to scale down or to reduce one's craving and greed, and then that naturally reduces our tension, and then there's not a lot of attention to express to the loved ones anyway. You're not taking on too much. Life's nearly finished. We act as though we got a long way to go. Well, I don't think so. Many people have died, on us much earlier than we thought they will, and one day we will. And so when we don't consider that, then people suffer from the shock of loss of loved ones, and they're not coping with it, so they're suffering. For a lot of people who are really negative is because they are still not recovering from the loss of their loved ones. And so they're really stressed by it, and therefore they're very angry and they blame themselves. So all of these things are really related. So therefore, some people who are really aggressive in your situation, you should think, oh, they must have a lot of stress like this. They have loss of life, parents or families or loved ones, or they have to be in a place where none of their loved ones are there. They're separated by 1,000 miles, so they have a lot of stress. So when you start thinking like that, if it's often correct, then we don't personalize this, and we therefore are more spacious to practice compassion, because we can see it very clearly, and we don't see their suffering is a cause of our suffering at all. Their suffering is cause of our compassion if we choose. Their suffering is a cause of our compassion because our suffering is only caused by our own greed. so they can't cause our suffering. So it's so simple, So therefore, why we have to worry that they are suffering? If we can do something to de-escalate, we do. If not, of course, we have to learn to make sure that they don't get exacerbated by our unskillful responses. So I'll stop. I'm suffering. Are you hungry?
How can we help you?
Yeah, this gentleman hasn't eaten at all.